Here it is.
I know.
Lunchtime.
It's already here. Lunchtime.
Lunchtime.
My stomach's growling.
Is it really? I was eating some trail mix. The girls helped make it, so it's got a lot of marshmallows. It's not as nourishing as you'd want.
It has all the best of the best, right?
Right. And I can't, I open the bag and it's like the proverbial, I hear of people with cats that they say whenever the cat hears a can opener, the cat comes running. So with this, whenever the girls hear the bag opening up, can I have a marshmallow?
So in your household, who gets the marshmallow? Who gets the raisins?
Right.
We got to pick them out, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I'm like, you got to earn your marshmallow. You got to eat.
I remember my family, that used to be a contention in our household because you'd pick them out and then when someone is about the trail mix and they want the whole plethora of taste in their mouth, it's like missing the chocolate chip, missing the
all that's left is the rejects, what nobody wants.
The adult snacks.
It gets so boring once the kids pass through.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it is so great to be here with you guys on Thursday afternoon, and we are, my goodness, we've got so much going on.
Yeah.
And actually have happened last night.
Yeah. We're in Lent now, man. Day 2 of Lent.
It's incredible. So last night, can we talk about last night?
Yeah.
As people are trying to log on and join us. And
So Lent starts with Ash Wednesday, and we have the tradition is an evening service of reflection and repentance and ashes. And we did that. Plus, we... what do you want to talk about?
Oh man, I want to talk about the baptisms.
Yeah, we were able to do some baptisms, which is not typical,
right?
But shouldn't it be?
And last night was actually a first experience for me in that both our in-person and online truly actively engaged in the commitment and the oaths that we take as a church. I just loved it. I watched back the service. We had a little over 160 people join us online, and then we had about
join us live online.
Yeah, and then we had about 44, 45 in person, and to see all the I wills come online and all the people shouting out inside, in the sanctuary was just. It was a fresh and new way of looking at baptism. Yeah, it's a great way to start Lent.
It is a great way to start Lent. That we are incorporated together. We do this together. We walk this road together.
Yeah. So this time that we're gathering on Thursdays, this is something new that we started a little bit ago, but this is a time for us to check in. So we invite you to comment, to engage. We're going to take a look at the text that's coming up this Sunday. We're going to focus in on just a couple key verses that we're going to spend some time just kind of chatting about. Yeah. And so this is not just a listen to us thing. If when we read the text here in a little bit, if you want to engage and post questions and what does this text mean to you, we invite you to do that. This is this time. This is this 20 minutes that we can just really dive in and look ahead to Sunday. So we invite you to take a moment as people are still logging on to enjoy the tea time video, and we'll see you here in about 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
All right, and we are back.
Still here.
Yep. And so this week we are starting a new sermon series. We're going to have a Lenten focus. We're jumping back to the lectionary.
Right.
And we started off last night with Joel chapter 2. We looked at some key verses in there. And we did talk about how it was a little dark, but it really did ground us and really did set the tone for Lent. But this week, we're actually going to look at a promise and a commitment made to Noah.
Right.
Through Noah to us.
Right. And we were just talking about this 3 weeks ago. And it's something that I always am interested in when there's a close repeat like this. You know, when you read the Bible on your own, you read it and you think about it, you pray about it. Oh, thanks God, that's a word for me. Or oh, I wonder what I have this question. But then if you immediately you reread it, there's something else that's happening there. And so it's just fascinating to me that we're going to revisit a text that we've already sort of talked about. We didn't do this text directly, but we talked about the story of Noah. And we're going back to the promise. And the theme for Lent this year, the reason we started a new series is because of the season of Lent. We're going to go back to walking through God's big story. Is because it's focused on the passage from the prophet Joel we read last night, which has right in the middle of what's actually pretty horrifying. If you read all of chapter 2, it's horrifying, but right in the middle of it, there's this command, this invitation from God to the version we read last night was to rip out the wickedness from your heart instead of tearing your clothing. And so yet some harsh words from our Savior and Redeemer to get serious about the things that really get in our way, that prevent us from accessing grace and living grace-filled lives. But right after that, there is this promise. There is this, and the prophet is saying that you already know who God is, and you already know that God is this faithful. So for Lent, we're looking at this reality that we've got to be serious about the choices we make, how we conduct ourselves, how we honor God with our lives. But what inspires that is not this guilt or shame or this, oh, I just can't quite get through this. It's the promise. It's the promise of God's enduring faithfulness. And so the theme for Lent is rend, from the old word to tear, like to tear this out. But it contains it. So the full title, how do we rend is the title, and then the other part. The subtitle is Rend Your Hearts, Claiming the Promise.
Claiming the Promise.
Yeah. And so we're starting today with, is this the first? This is the first. No, this is the second promise, right? The first promise was to Cain.
Yep.
I didn't even think to look this up. It just occurred to me. But because we've been walking through it, I'm pretty sure that's right. And the idea of God making a verbal commitment to a human or humans. The first one was Cain, that's really impressive. I mean, we should probably talk about that some other time. Some other time.
Another tea time,
Another tea time. And then this is the second promise, and it's the one that happens right after the flood.
Right.
And this is probably the one that is the one that people remember so much because it's the promise that comes with a sign. So the verse for today, you want to read it for us, Eric?
So we got Genesis 9, verses 14 and 15 here. And this is the CEB version. So when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember the covenant between me and you and every living being among all the creatures. Flood waters will never again destroy all creatures.
Yeah. It says bow. It means rainbow.
Rainbow.
When I see, I'm just gonna have to look it up too. I don't have that kind of memory. When I see it in the clouds, right? When I see the bow in the clouds, when it appears in the clouds, I'll remember my covenant. So I guess there's a few things we should probably unpack. One is covenant. That's a word. That's a very churchy word, or it's in Halo.
It is in Halo.
It is in Halo.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe I'm not sure what it means in Halo. Isn't that aren't those the alien bad guys? Are they the Covenant? I think that's true. Yeah, that's who. So. Yeah. So irrelevant.
That's a very specific group of people.
Yeah, of a
fictional people.
A specific misapplication of the word covenant.
Yeah, this is different.
Yeah. So what's your down and dirty definition of covenant?
So I always look at this like as simple as possible. It's the unbreakable promise. It's an unbreakable promise that I feel like, as how I look at this is, it's it's God's hand in this. It's always unbreakable promise on God's part, but we as humans fall short, and we seem to be the ones that either one, forget it, or two, mess up. So when I view covenant, I'm really thinking it's this lasting promise that was meant to be held out by both parties faithfully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the struggle.
I've never heard it quite put like that, the unbreakable promise. That's so good. Because that's the idea. The idea of the covenant. And this is a human thing that God has applied. This was basically a formal kind of divinely inspired contract that people would enter into with other people.
Yeah.
But that whole divine part was meant to be, this is absolutely binding. There's no getting out of this covenant. But a lot of those would be like some of the main contracts that we understand today. Those things that are more than just an agreement. But it was meant to be unbreakable. If you were to break it, there was pretty much a lethal penalty. Was the idea that you break it upon your death.
Well, and I think like a practical thing that most of us encounter in society is the wedding vows.
Yeah.
Right. That's just a practical thing. It depends on the religion, but there's this level of
right
severity if those oaths are broken. And so we say I do, and and we say our oaths, and we do these things. In certain aspects, people hold that to a different level of what was said.
Yeah.
Some it is a forever binding covenant. Doesn't matter what happens. This is what I said. This is what it's going to be, despite the circumstance. And then others, it's different. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so what's really cool about here is that this is not come into how am I trying to say this? This covenant doesn't happen in a typical covenant way. There's when we return to the story of Abraham, we're going to see a sort of typical covenant ceremony. It's the only reason it's not typical is because God's in it, but you'll see two parties coming together to cut a covenant. Here, God is just declaring it into existence. It's one-sided. God is the one who is making the covenant and going to keep it. And as a sign, the rainbow is in the sky. And the covenant is simply this, that God is not going to destroy the earth through this is not going to repeat. This idea of a flood that wipes out all life is an event that won't happen again. And what's really important is part of God's making this covenant is just before he makes it, God says that God repeats this truth that the Bible's already put out there, which is that there is this thing in the human heart that is bent towards its own destruction. The word used is evil, and I try to be careful with evil because I think we don't understand it. Evil doesn't just mean the worst or awful violence or deep darkness and sinister movements. It really just means being in opposition to God's good way. That's a real easy beginning to what evil can become. And so God is saying that there's something in our hearts that's bent towards our own destruction because we are constantly setting ourselves against God's good way. And so God acknowledges that and then says, but I'm never going to do this flood again.
And you mentioned something there that maybe I heard it somewhere in seminary. I believe this is one of the only covenants that was so one-sided. It's not contingent on anything.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think that says a lot about, God just destroyed and reset. And what God's saying here is, this is not contingent on anything you do or this is my promise.
Yeah.
This is my everlasting promise. In fact, the scriptures, we'll dive into it on Sunday and look at the whole text, but from generation to generation, a generation on.
Right.
Like this is an everlasting promise that is continuing to Noah and his immediate to us today.
Yeah.
Future generations.
Yeah, and right. So there's a couple things that make this one stand out. One is there's it's so one-sided, and the other is it's got this very visible sign. And you know, and God says, you know, the bow will appear in the clouds, and I'll remember. Which I immediately kind of start to chuckle. I'm like, you know, God is not forgetful. You know, it's not like God needs the rainbows or otherwise, you know, that flooding's going to start, right? It's
That's a good point.
He's not up there filling up the jars, you know, and sees the rainbows. Oh, that's right. That's not how it is.
I'm about to turn it on.
No.
Here's a light sprinkle, and then I see the rainbow.
Yeah, and so I find that so interesting because God doesn't mean remember because otherwise I'd forget. It's the remembrance of the ongoing commitment to act in this manner. And so, which again, it's not like God is just sitting up there with buckets of water ready to dump. He's not remembering that, oh yeah, that's right, I said I wouldn't do this. He's not constantly choosing to do this. It's a constant choice that for life as opposed to destruction. And what we see break out of this story is God present in the world in a different way, in a particular personal way. So he's not remembering to not do something. It's God's I'm stumbling here. You might need to help me out. It's God's repeated commitment to uphold life and to lead us to redemption. I feel like that's what is happening when he's saying, "I'll remember."
Well, and that. I feel like that's the promise, right? I'm committed to this.
Yeah.
Even if it's probably much easier for God just to be like, let's start over.
Yeah.
Let me find the one faithful and start over.
Well, there's a few times where God says that,
Right.
and
Like-
relents.
Instead, God is saying, I'm now committed for all of creation.
Yeah.
Even if this is God's all-knowing, even if that means one day I'm going to have to send my son
Yeah.
for the redemption of the world.
Yeah.
I'm not going to destroy it. I think that in of itself, sometimes I try to think of this, like I like to put myself in the mindset of Noah hearing this, right? I'm going to put a rainbow in the sky. So is it so much that God's remembering, like this is my commitment to you, or is it more so like what is Noah thinking every time they see that rainbow?
I think that's what Bonnie's getting at.
Yeah.
She says he set his bow pointed back at him. Hello, Sherry. Hello, Eleanor. I see you
Yes.
saying hello. Glad you're with us. Yeah, you know, I think that's really the idea. You know, God doesn't need this sign. This is visible for us. And how she put it, pointing back at him. And I do wonder, I mean, there's a real difference between Noah and the people that lived through it.
Right.
What happens the next time it rains? There's some PTSD right there, right?
Like, can you imagine?
No.
Like,
And
imagine
maybe
having the do we need to build an ark?
right.
Is this it? Did we do something wrong?
Right. I mean,
Did we do something so bad that we're just going to have to?
yeah. And so I didn't grow up with that kind of fear.
That's a fear.
But
right.
but I've still been through some really terrible storms, right? And imagine if I did go through that. And so get this. And here's the other thing too: it doesn't appear every single time it rains. So there's something beautiful that's happening here. This equipping that God is doing. God is equipping the faithfulness that God is leading us into, right? You know, there's those times where God just seems so close and is comforting, and there's those times where it feels like God has pulled away. But that's not what's happening. It's something about leading us into a deeper place of trust. You don't need to see my rainbow every time it rains, because I'm leading you to trust. I'm this kind of a God. I'm a God about life and redemption and rescue. Oh, man.
Yeah, and I get really excited when I see a rainbow.
Do you?
I do. Like, I tell people about it.
Rainbow!
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like shout it out.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
take pictures.
Good
Like,
for you.
and I don't know about you guys and how you respond, but what do you think when you see a rainbow, right? Like, how do we react to that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think getting back to what you just said, what are the rainbows in your life to where, yeah, you've had these storms, you've had these things. Do you find the same joy in knowing that God's on the other end being faithful?
Yeah.
Do you find the same excitement knowing that God is in control?
Oh,
that
that's
God
such a
has
good question. What are the rainbows in your life?
What are the rainbows? And then also, do you get excited enough to tell people about God at the forefront?
Right. Yeah, because this is a super visible thing. It's not just
Very visible.
Oh, I just happened to see one. I mean,
Right.
it's meant to. It's like a broad broadcast
Sure.
of God's faithfulness. So yeah, that's. But
It's like a
lot
rocket launch on the Space Coast.
yeah.
Not only can
Yeah.
you see it, it's there.
It's there,
But
yeah.
your house shakes.
Well, and I love that too, because and there's so many people that gather, like
Right.
it catches our attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's so. But a lot of our own personal rainbows are just that. They're personal rainbows. You might not see it.
Right.
You know, like here, one of the things that here's an example. My dad told a story where he was having to go to a church meeting, and he really was just seeking the Lord about this. There was a big decision that his team was having to make, and he just asked the Lord for basically a sign of God's faithfulness and what he could do. And for my father, he really felt that connection through just a hawk happened to appear, and just you really should hear my dad tell the story. But the way he tells the story, it just he really felt it, and I mean he knew that was a bird, but something touched his spirit about it, where he felt like, yeah, not just a bird either. It's something that God is communicating with my soul. And so now, and that was for my father, right? That was a thing. That was that night. But every time I see a hawk, I think of God's faithfulness. I think of God touching my father's heart in a moment when he needed it. I can't even remember the story very well, but I remember the faithfulness. And so what are your hawks? What are your rainbows? What are those things that maybe you only know? And then, because here's the thing, as you share it, here I am. It's probably 40 years ago that this thing happened. It's still alive, and hopefully it's blessing you, this story of my dad and God and the hawk. You know, if you share your rainbows, it expands our collective experience of this God who remembers, who is faithful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And then when you key in on rainbow, right? Do you find hope? Do you find joy? Do you find, all those things associated with God's fulfilling his promise? I think about Lent, and I think about how too often we start looking at our storms, and we start looking at our situations, our past mistakes, our regrets, and doing these things, and we allow shame and guilt and all of that to block us from the view of God's promise, to block us. It's like a cloudy day that you can't see the rainbow, right? Like we allow some of those things in our lives to truly blind us from seeing through to God's promise. And I think Lent is a perfect example that in this time that we're going to be really digging into this idea of tearing it out, it's not in the sense of shame. It's not in a sense of
that's
God
so good.
like,
yeah. You are so awful.
You could be so
How
much
many
better.
times do I have to tell you?
That
is not God.
How many sermons have you heard? How many Bible studies have you been a part of? How many times?
Yeah.
We make mistakes. We're human. We make mistakes. But that is the intent of this, is not to make people feel bad. It's not to make people just dwell and hurt more. It's to bring reconciliation. It's to point us back to that promise. And that's why I love that we're starting with this text. It's establishing first and foremost, as we journey through this, remember that I'm faithful.
An
unconditional promise.
And I was just struck by this as you're talking about it, and I'm visualizing it. It is such a beautiful sign. It didn't have to be that beautiful.
No, it
You know?
Could have been a hawk.
It
Just
could have
sitting
been a
on-
hawk just sitting there, wet. It's a wet bird.
There you go.
There you go. Look at the wet bird.
No,
and
but it is.
yeah.
It's majestic, right?
It's,
Like,
it's
that's what-
glorious.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, and I love it. I love that you get excited about rainbows because I
Yeah.
think some people don't.
Oh, and the best is when it's over water,
Yeah.
or you're out on
yeah.
the water. You can see the whole.
We see the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the great things about this is why I think God has given us as a community and as a family the gift of children in our midst. Right? Children they lose it over rainbows.
They really do.
They really do.
And I lose it with them. Have you seen the movie Elf?
Yes.
When the fake. Yeah. I'm that guy
Yeah.
jumping in front of the kids.
Yeah. Good.
It's a rainbow. Look, everyone, look.
Yeah.
Come.
And that's it. Everyone look. Yeah. So this Lenten season, it's so great that we're starting this way because Lent has this cast to it of down and sorrow and repentance. It is serious work, but it's beautiful and joyful. We're not talking about piling on the bad feelings. We're talking about ripping it out. Like, how great is that?
Yeah.
How great is that? And the promise is beautiful, like staggeringly beautiful. It's the kind of thing that you would just stare at if you weren't driving.
Yeah.
Right? The kind of thing you would just stare at.
And I was in a conversation, I can't remember, it was probably in January. Someone said something to me. I was checking in on them, or they had a scenario where they had to have surgery done and all this stuff. And how are you doing? Right? And the response was, well, I had to bleed a little bit so that I'm better. I had to bleed a little bit so that I could be healthy again.
Well, that's hard to take.
Man, that's hard to take,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of this idea is like we're trying to bring out some of the stuff we truly need to work on. It is dirty work, but the beauty behind it is God makes it beautiful.
Yeah.
The beauty behind it is it becomes healthy again. It
That's the
becomes
song.
Restored.
That's the
from
song
last
we
night.
ended with
Yeah.
last night. So we do need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
We're going to be hitting these themes for the next several Sundays and tea times. If you didn't have a chance to be with us for Ash Wednesday, I invite you to go back with that service. It's something that just because it's now Thursday doesn't mean that God's grace in that moment is still it's still accessible. And you'll want to go through it. You'll want to bring the elements for communion. You want to bring some oil if you don't have ash, and to anoint yourself and the people with you. You'll want to respond with the gathered people of God at the baptism and our promise to those two girls and their family, and to be a part of that. So go if you didn't get to, go back and check that out.
And make sure you type "I will."
Yes.
Once you get to that
still
point.
type it.
Yeah.
Make that promise. Yes.
Make
Thanks,
that
Eric.
commitment.
So we will be back on Sunday. We've
Yes.
got our 9:30 online and here, and our 11 o'clock here. We've got our drive-in, youth at 5.
Yep.
And
then in a couple weeks, if you want to go to our website, wesleychurch.org, you'll see the discipleship classes that we're going to be doing for the Lenten study. We got a couple of them on there already, so if you want to go on, register. It's real easy. You just sign in. It's a drop-down menu. Check if you want to be in person or online.
You've done such a good job with
Man,
that. That is so cool.
We're excited about it. So.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about the one I get to do. It's about forgiveness. I think we got one that's going to be Genesis, right?
No, so we're actually going to shift it a little bit.
Oh.
And Bonnie's going to teach 1 Thessalonians, do a study out of there.
Cool.
So we're really excited about it.
Oh, that's going to be great.
So a lot of good things, guys. Again, go to the website, check it out. Continue to follow us on Facebook, share and like this so others can join in the fun.
Yeah.
And we'll be back Sunday.
God bless you. Stay
All right,
safe.
have
stay
a
close.
great rest of the week.
Bye.